us. A few of you commented that the noise was too much in the previous recording, so I'm just trying this again. If you can let me know if the sound is okay on this one. I'm just hoping that it works. So this recording is to just give you a bit of guidance on the part before our NSS, so that if you are wanting to start to work on your assessment, that you just have a bit of insight into it. So just to start, to say to you guys, please just have a look at the honesty declaration, because there is a lot more to it now than in previous years in terms of speaking about the use of AI, and how if you use AI, you do need to get permission from your lecturer, as well as the fact that you need to declare that you have used AI, and how you do that is screenshots your prompt question as well as all the responses thereafter. So it is a lot more work using the AI. Obviously, also you have the issue that the referencing might not be correct, or definitely won't be correct, even if you ask it to use Harvard referencing. Obviously, our VC referencing is actually slightly different. So if you're using AI, please just use it sparingly, and only use it if you are feeling confident in the content itself before, because you need to have understanding to use it correctly. All right. Secondly, just to remind you about the -5 and 10% disclaimer in terms of your referencing. If you see -5 or -10% on your script when you get it back for your part submission, please go and have a look at what the document here says in terms of what falls under a -5 category and what falls under -10. If your work has very little referencing, or if your work is lacking a reference list, or your sources, or you have big chunks without referencing and sources for intakes, obviously sorry for repeating myself there, but then obviously you'd be flagged for plagiarism, and then you would obviously be contacted by plagiarism officers. Obviously, I do not want that for you, so please rather spend some time working on your referencing. If you're not sure, please contact the library, and they'll be able to give you further assistance with your referencing. I will also go through referencing in detail in our NSS, just to make sure that you are clear how to reference the textbook. So in the meantime, if you're working on this and need your referencing checked, please will you contact the library. Okay. I will go through the full parameters in our NSS. I'm going to just go through content briefly in this recording, just to give you some insight, just to make sure that you have got that bit of time, seeing as our NSS is towards the end of the week. So just to give you the context, the background, you are writing in a capacity as a junior journalist, and you are working for the publication house called Groves End Media. In this, you will be producing different content for different scenarios. So in your part in particular, you're going to be looking at more the theoretical side of the module, and then for your POE, you'll be looking at the practical aspect of your module. So for this part, or others are, you can refer to it as an assignment or a formative assessment. What is important to understand is that there are 3 questions in this particular part. Question 1, 2, and 3 all are out of 600 to 1,000 words. It says, please do not go over word count, your lecturer will not mark it. I will give you a 10% leeway up, so you can go maximum 1.1, just to accommodate for referencing, because all intakes referencing, any subheadings, anything like that, does get taken into the word count. Please do not waste your time going through and trying to count your entire assignment without the intakes referencing, or setting an algorithm to count it without referencing. In terms of VC policy, your referencing gets included in that word count, hence me giving you that 10%, so that if you do include quite a bit of referencing, and I can see that you've put in all that extra effort, that leniency is afforded to you, but you cannot go below that 600 word limit, because if you're going below that, it means that you do not have sufficient information. So I'm not encouraging you to go over the 1,000 word count, not in the slightest. It is always best to remain within word count, but you cannot go below it. All right. So that refers to all three of the questions. So I'm going to focus on the content of each of the questions rather than repeating myself in each instance speaking to that fact. All right. So let's have a look at your three questions. So what I have done is I did send out the link to last year's recording, which speaks to the content of Learning Unit 2 and 3. I will also speak to that in our next collab, which is also our NSS, just to make sure everyone is all on the same page. But I did put that out so that you have access to that information earlier, again, rather than later. And what is important to remember are these are the three theoretical learning units, and then after that becomes practical. So for each of these questions, question 1 is focusing on Learning Unit 1, question 2, Learning Unit 2, question 3, Learning Unit 3. You'll notice the mark allocation is 30, 30, 40, even though the word count is the same. What is expected, obviously, in question 3 is a little bit more depth due to the higher mark allocation. But in each of the instances, they do explain to you how the word count is broken up. And please, if you're unsure of anything, go look at the rubric, because the rubric does break it down and give you that assistance in terms of where the mark allocation is and what is expected to get those high marks. So those rubrics are there to help you. Okay, so for question 1, it says, at training, you learn that it is important for you to understand the history of the journalism industry in South Africa. The course focuses on understanding the journalism industry during the apartheid era and how that period has shaped the industry today. So it says, journalists at Groves End Media are required to learn this, as it is what sets the stories that they produce apart from the rest of the rest, because they have context. Sorry. At the end of the session, you're given the task to write a reflection on what you have learned about this. Now, guys, what they're meaning as a reflection, they are meaning looking back at the content, so looking back at Learning Unit 1. So you're not writing this as a reflection, as a I learned, I feel, I understand. Please do not do that. This is academic writing, and in this instance, they're not asking for any personal viewpoints. When they're talking about reflection, they're meaning a looking back on the content. So you're looking back on the content that you have done for Learning Unit 1. So what you will be doing in particular for this question is you are going to be writing a discussion. So keyword, the instruction word there is a discussion, which means that it is not just about presenting facts, it's about presenting facts and breaking those down, showing me your understanding through your use of discussion, through your words, through the way in which you explain things, and then apply your examples. So it's a discussion in which you discuss the journalism industry during the apartheid era by identifying laws and restrictions placed on the media. And that's obviously for 10 marks. So what is important here is that, as you guys have noticed, there isn't the set laws and restrictions as it were in the textbook. They are expecting you to do the additional research. There are those extra readings that I've put in the OneDrive, and I also previously, earlier in the semester, I did send out links to additional sources that can help you with those laws and restrictions. So you have been given quite a few additional resources that you are free to use. So for this particular section for 10 marks, this is your context. This is your background section over here, in which you will give me the context about a particular law or restriction, or setting the scene as to a particular event or scenario that took place for the media. For example, what you could use is the fact that I'm not going to give the names of specific laws and stuff, because obviously that's what I want you to research. But for example, the media wasn't allowed to report, or the South African media specifically were not allowed to report on other political parties and political figures that went directly against the apartheid regime. So that is speaking to censorship. So you would then mention that specific law, give me the context of what that law is about, and then you would include Now, going on to the next section, you will give me 3 examples of the laws and restrictions placed in the media during the apartheid era, and you'll see that is for 20 marks. So what you need to think about is that each of these examples needs a bit of context, a bit of background, stating that law, discussing it, and then giving me the detailed example. So your discussion should be broken down into 3 different aspects, 3 different laws and restrictions, depending on which one you're focusing on, and each of those should be broken down into 1 to 2 paragraphs. So because this is a discussion and not an essay, you're not going to have a, in the following essay or in the following this, a discussion means you can go straight into the actual theory of the question. What you can do is give me 1 or 2 sentences of context to, give me almost like a mini intro and like a mini conclusion at the end, but you're not expected full academic writing because they have not asked for an essay, but you can give me that context at the start and the end. Just make sure you don't say the following essay. If you were doing, say, a thesis statement, as it were, it would just be, this discussion will focus on, right? But you're not expected to write a traditional intro and conclusion like you would in an essay, an academic essay. So how you need to structure this question is, like I say, break it down into the 3 laws and restrictions that you choose. First, give me the context of, for example, what censorship meant during that apartheid era. Then you would state the law and restriction, and then you would go into the description of that example. So what is important here is that you need theory, discussion, and example. And what I will be looking for, you need to work out on basically 10 marks per law and restriction and that example. So that if you think of it being 30 marks divided by 3, go 10 marks a pop. So how you work it out is that context and everything, you're looking at about 3 or 4 marks for that context. And then if you're looking at about 9 marks per example, and then it gives me obviously those couple of marks to, if you've got one section which has a bit more detail, I can give you those additional marks. So think about that structure, giving me context, stating the law or the restriction, and then describing it or explaining it, discussing it through the use of examples. So you would, for example, say how a publication maybe had information redacted, or how someone was exiled because of naming it, or how a publication got shut down. So you need those specifics. So that is question 1. So think about it in terms of 3 different scenarios, each with its context, stating of the restriction or law, and then an applicable example to support what you're saying. Please remember to finish the loop, as it were. So if you give me context, theory, and example, make sure you have that 1 sentence which, relates that example back to the theory, back to the law restriction. That way I can see your thought process and how it all connects. So that is question 1. Question 2 is looking at representation within the South African media. So it says here, one of the editors of Groves in Media gave a presentation on representation in the context of the media. Her presentation gave examples from Africa and Europe, which was deliberate to see if you understood the difference between representation in the context of South Africa versus the rest of the world. So then you're divided into breakaway groups and asked to discuss this. So what you're writing down is basically the discussion, the analysis that you did with your breakaway group. But again, you're writing it from an academic perspective. In all these questions, in-text referencing, and it's again about presenting an idea followed by the examples and the discussion. So it's write a discussion. I just want to get my brush up. There we go. So again, writing a discussion in which you discuss South African media's representation of gender, race, ethnicity, identity, age, and class, and discuss any 2. So in this instance, what you can do is first give me some context into media representation in general, and pull out bits and pieces of each of those or a few of them, but then you will focus down onto 2. So it's important to not speak about all 6 of the different representations. The focus is on 2, but you can speak to more in that context intro-y type aspect of it, and then boil it down to 2. So now this is where it's different from question 1. You are still expected to have 3 real-life examples of the representation from South African media. So what's important here is SA media, not international's representation of South Africa, but South Africa representing South Africa. So you can decide how you want to break this up. Let's say you're finding more on gender, then you can, again, work on that, breaking it into 3, where you can do 2 paragraphs per thought. So maybe you're talking about representation of gender in a positive way and then maybe in a negative way. Then what you would do is you would give me a discussion on gender and representation, and then give me a real life example of where media has represented gender. In that instance, if you find one of your chosen topics that has more information than the other, you could give me 2 examples on the one and 1 example on the other. Or, for example, if you were doing gender and race, maybe you do 1 on gender, 1 on race, and 1 that speaks to both, if that is the example that you found. But again, it's all about closing that loop. So it's about presenting the idea, presenting the thought on the representation, giving the theory from the textbook or your research to support that, then applying a real life example, and then that final sentence that relates that example, or a few sentences that relates that example back to the theory. So the idea is, again, making sure that I can see your thought progression, I can see the connection between the theory and their example. So you're not just basically plonking theory, example, I need to see the connection. That is what's important in a discussion, that it's not just presenting facts and just putting it out there and getting me to connect the dots. You need to connect the dots for me. So make sure that you think about how you are working in that cyclical fashion, so that it is, context, theory, example, relating example back to the theory through your discussion. All right. So make sure you choose examples where you can get enough information. The reality is, within the South African media, you're going to find a lot of examples on all 6 of them, but find the ones that you feel you connect with the most, that you're able to discuss in the most amount of detail. Okay, so that is our question 2. Then finally, let's look at question 3. Like I said, this is for 40 marks, so they are expecting a bit more depth. They're expecting a bit more to your argument or to your discussion, even though the word count is the same. The idea is making sure that you think about, what you're trying to tell me. So it says Groves in Media prides itself on how it has remained relevant in a social news market, so within a digital environment. So, social media, new media, that kind of thing. During training, you learn that things are not like they used to be. The team is facing challenges in this space, and they're looking for new ways which can help the publication. So they're trying to make themselves more relevant in the digital environment, because they are traditionally a print publication, and they are trying to look to our current market and trying to fit in better. So they have assigned a task team to investigate this matter. So again, writing a discussion, so no traditional intro conclusion, but discussing, having those few opening sentences or short little paragraph, putting it into context, but not a full intro as you would normally. So again, a discussion where you suggest any 3 strategies that Groves in Media can apply to stay relevant in the social news market. Now guys, what is important here is that you don't have to use only the challenges which are listed in your textbook. If you find ones online which you think are, or 3 strategies, sorry, not challenges. If you can find online strategies that you think are really applicable, please feel free to use them. The textbook is obviously there as a starting off point, but if you find other ones are more relevant, then go for it. You're not going to get penalized by not using the textbook for all of them. I would suggest using at least 1, maybe 2 of the textbook, but if you find something really interesting, then just ensure that the source that you're using is relevant. So how this question is different, you're still going to be breaking it down into 3 strategies with discussion surrounding those 3 strategies. So again, break each strategy down to 1 or 2 paragraphs. try work on the premise of 2 to 4 paragraphs a page. Remember, 1 or 2 sentences is not a paragraph. So what you're going to do here, so you're going to give a strategy, again, context, theory, giving the strategy, and then you're going to apply the strategy to the given scenario. So given to Grove's End, trying to stay relevant, what you can also do is any information they give you in the background within question 1, within question 2, you can use that in the as the given scenario. So anything where they speak to Grove's End Media and what it's about within this brief, you may use. But it's about applying the strategy. It's about showing how the strategy can work for Grove's End Media in particular. So it's not made up. It's us trying to get you to have some broader thinking, and trying to show us that you understand different strategies and how they could work in the real world. And how you support this is by giving an example where these strategies have been implemented successfully. Now, it does not state that it has to be South African implementation, so you can give me international implementation. I'm absolutely fine with that. It is not stated in South Africa, but it's got to be where the strategy has been used. So if you find an online example of where a strategy has been used, like I said, not having to pull from the textbook, then obviously you can use that as an example. So where this one is different, it's about stating the strategy, giving the theory, then it's applying it to the given scenario, and then discussing that example, a real world example of where it is, being put in place. And then again, you need that last looping sentence or sentences that relate that implementation and the strategies back to that theory. So where the others are working on a 3-step process, this one I would say works on a 4-step process. Theory, context, the strategy to the scenario, the example, and then that finishing off that relates it all back to each other. If you do that, you should be successful. If you do it properly, you should be able to get the marks for it. But if there are any gaps where I'm having to fill in, or there's any gaps where I can see that you're not quite understanding what the scenario is, what the laws are, in any of the questions, obviously then, even if you have attempted that 3 or 4-step process, you can't be given the marks if I'm having to fill in the gaps. So when you're reading through your work, please read it aloud. That's how you always pick up mistakes. And please get either someone else to read it or read through it carefully and see if you are asking more questions by the end of your explanation, because if you are asking those questions, chances are I'm going to be asking those questions. And then what that means is that I can't give you marks if those questions are not being answered. Right. So I hope this helps. I hope the sound is better on this one. Please, if you could let me know. And I will again go through this with you guys in our NSS session next week. Have a good evening, everyone. Sorry, I'm recording this at night. Hope you're quiet. But good luck, and I'll chat to you all soon.